If you're in ministry and you preach, whether you preach every week or whenever you get an opportunity, here's what I know. You probably want to improve. Not that I am an expert in any way, but today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to give you 8 things that I have learned from preaching every week, part 1.
Welcome back to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Androsian, and joining me is Dylan Dodson. And today we're talking about 8 things, not me, because I don't do this, 8 things that Dylan has learned from preaching every week. And I know what you might be thinking. How in the world do we fit 8 things into 15 minutes? We won't. So this is going to be part 1 of part 2.
There we go, because we value that 15 minutes or less so much.
That's right. We almost always stick with it.
We're going to share 8 things. I'm not a professional. Well, professional's not right. I'm not like the best at the world at this at all.
Yeah.
But when you do it every week, you learn some things. And so if you're brand new to planning a church, or you're interested in planning a church, or maybe you've been preaching way longer, we always can learn things from one another. Of
course.
So here are 8 things over the last 2 years of me preaching most weeks that I've learned that I didn't know in the beginning. And so here we go. Number 1, that experience isn't the only thing you need to get better. And I may have, I don't know, between my blog and this and just talking with people what I've said where.
Whatever.
This might be something we've talked about in previous episodes at some point. But I had this thought in my mind when we started that I would just get better with more experience. Like every week I could preach, I would just get better, which is true to an extent. Like you definitely are better when you've got some skill. You know, skills like is getting better at something. Like talent's more of a gifting, something you're born with. Skill is something that you learn and you improve on. Your skill does improve the more reps you get. So I don't want to downplay that at all, especially if you haven't preached very much. Like for a while, the best thing you can get is experience. But at some point, if you really want to take the next step, you can't just rely on preaching. You've got to do more things. And I can't speak to whether or not how much I've improved in the past 2 years, but I would say year 2 of New City Church, I improved much more than year 1. Although you would probably assume year 1 I would improve more because I was more newer to it, and so the reps were more important. But I got to the point where I didn't want the sermon just to be good. Or just to be finished. Like I always wanted to be good, to be good, but my bigger thing was like I finished writing it. Now I want it to be good, even with my experience now, and I would say I'm better than I was 2 years ago. It takes more out of me to write a message now than it did then because of a lot more things that I'm thinking about and considering. But I would just say this: when I really wanted, about 9 months into New City Church's existence, a year, I was like, I feel like I'm getting better, but not nearly the way I thought I would.
Right.
I was like, no, I got to get it. So I started listening to more podcasts intentionally. I took some online preaching courses. I learned and read about how to preach without notes. Like I did things very intentionally. Of course, having reps every week while I was learning how to do it helped. Like if I was just studying these things and I wasn't having reps, they would be hard to do. But I would say you can't just get better by experience, which I think is a issue that a lot of people, maybe a lot of young preachers, run into.
Yeah, I think you said it well, that it's not one or the other, I guess you could say. Like, in other words, if you're a resident and hoping to plant a church one day, but not in a position where you're preaching every week, preach wherever you can. Get as many reps as possible. Anyone invites you, go, do whatever you can. But that's only going to get you so far.
Right. Yeah.
And then you need to be intentional about it.
And don't just rely on the experience. Like try to read books or try to read things or talk to people or listen and things that maybe you can implement one time for the next time that you preach.
Yeah.
Like don't just say I'm preaching and that's going to be enough. You got to actually try to improve skills or try different things. You just have to be intentional beyond just preaching to get better.
Now, question for you before we go on to the next one. When talking about, reading things, listening to other preachers, I'm sure you did a lot of, maybe you have certain people that you listen to a lot of. Did you ever have a fear of accidentally kind of adapting someone else's voice, sort of?
Yeah, probably earlier on, maybe when we started, I listened to one guy or a couple guys, maybe more than others. And so then I felt like I was, maybe even before we launched, like before I preached that often, I felt like I was kind of sounding like one person. So then when we kind of launched New City Church, I kind of stopped because I didn't want to sound like anybody.
Yeah.
And then I realized if I want to get better, like I've got to listen to people that are better. Like whatever your career field is, you've got to look to people that are good at what you're doing.
Exactly.
And so instead of just listening to one person, I rotated I've got about 4 or 5 guys now that I listen to that are pretty different in their styles of preaching. So that I can, again, if you're just listening to one person, that could be problematic. Yeah. But if you have at least a variety, that'll help that issue. And so for me, I didn't listen to anybody because I didn't want to sound like one person. I was like, well, how am I going to get better this way?
Exactly.
So instead I kind of have a variety of people that are not just the same preaching style.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. So experience is not the only thing you need to get better. Number 2, and here's the good news for you, especially if you're newer to this, that the nervousness does go away or at least it does greatly reduce. So I think part of this has to do with your personality, extroverted, introverted. Like if you get energized by being with people, or if being in front of people depletes you, like that's going to play a part of it. For me, like I don't get nervous at all anymore. Part of it's because I am energized by being with people. But when I started preaching, even the first 6 months of New City, even as I was doing it every week, I'd be like, man, I enjoy it while I'm up there, but gosh, like looking forward to Sundays, I'm like, oh man, I'm kind of not dreading this, but I'm really nervous. Like I remember one time when I was new, maybe a couple years before we launched New City Church, one of the first times a handful of times I preached, I was so nervous. I was speaking at this single adults thing. There's a couple hundred people. So it was the biggest thing I've ever preached before in my life. I was so nervous. I almost like didn't do it. Now I was going to do it, but everything in me was like, I don't want to do this. And then I would hear, preachers that I like talk about, I can't wait for Sunday, or I can't wait for this text. And I'm like, I want to be there. Yeah. And now that I've been doing it, I am there more and more. And so I would just encourage you that if you're excited about it and you're like, I enjoy doing it, but it takes so much out of me. I always encourage you that will go away the more opportunities you have.
I don't believe you. No, I don't have much to add. I don't preach every week.
But this is a good example. Yeah. So I preach every week. You've preached a handful of times in your life.
Yeah.
Like it takes a long time. Like it is something that will go down the more experience you get. One way I put it this way too is athletes talk about how they say, the playoffs, for example, if you're not a sports person, I'm sorry, how it speeds up a lot, and or the professional versus college, like it's so much faster. That's one of the ways I legitimately would explain preaching. Yeah. Like at least for me over the past year or so, as I feel like I've started to see some improvements, it felt like for me after a certain amount of time of preaching every week that it started to slow down. Like I wasn't so much focused on the next thing I was going to say, where I could actually like think while I was preaching, because I had more reps. I was used to it. I worked hard on it. And so I think that goes with the nervousness. Like you're worried about messing up. You're worrying about screwing up. The more experience you have, it feels like things slow down while you're preaching. So for whatever that's worth, I would just say the nervousness does go away, even if you feel like as Brian just said, he doesn't believe me.
Well, I mean, like you said, I've only preached a handful of times, but one thing I can say is the first few times I did, or the first time I did, I didn't really have a fear of public speaking. I've spoken in public before preaching, but it was more a fear of, like you said, stumbling over my words, right, or not sounding like I knew what I was talking about. Because it's the first time I'd ever preached, spoken about the Bible or anything right, like that. And so I had a huge fear of saying something wrong or misrepresenting something or something like that. And so I will say, over doing it a few times, that has gone down for me. Right. I'm preaching in a month or so, I'm already nervous. So it's not like it's gone down all the way.
Right.
But yeah, just getting some experience, I think, definitely helps alleviate that.
No, there's true. Maybe some people should just never preach. Like some people will always hate it. But if you do enjoy it, I would say like it will go. So like don't let that be the prohibitor from. Now if people are telling you, hey, this is awful, like I don't think you should do it, you should listen to them.
Yes.
But if you do enjoy it, it's going to be nerve-wracking for a while. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. I'll just tell you it does go away, which is something that you can look forward to.
Yep.
Number 3, improvement is much slower than you would hope it would be. Much slower. And it's
that's a good one.
It's like for me, one of the things that I was really excited about that's really helped me a lot is when we went to 2 services, just because I was able to preach a message, first of all, twice as many reps every week, which adds up to a lot. But also I was like, I didn't like how that worked. I was able to then try it again right away. Like I didn't have to wait next week and I'm like, okay, I'll try to slow down, or I'll try to pause here, or I'll try to use this inflection or use this motion. Like I was able to do it again right away. So that made a big difference. But even now, there's always a handful of things. I'm trying to keep it to like 1 or 2 things at a time because you can't do everything, that I will be like, literally as I'm preaching, I'm like, why did I do that? Why did I say it this way? Or why did I fumble over my words? Or why this is literally something I'm trying to get better at. And it just takes time. To encourage you, again, if somebody is telling you, hey, this is just not your thing, you should listen.
Listen to them.
But I also wouldn't necessarily let someone tell you that the first handful of times that you preach.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because I've heard people that were not that good that became good. And some people are just great from the beginning and some people aren't. But just because you're not great from the beginning doesn't mean you can't be good.
Yeah.
It's just hopefully to encourage you to keep trying hard, because I think sometimes it could be like, well, I'm not getting any better, so I'm just going to preach and I'm not going to work on it. You will get better, but it will be a lot slower than you would want it to be.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to what we said at the beginning of take as many reps as possible. It's not going to answer every issue, but it'll help iron out a lot. If you haven't planted yet and you preach every couple months, right, whenever you can, it's going to be a lot harder to improve these things that you're struggling with, or if you never really preach outside of your preaching course in seminary, it's going to be real hard to see what happens in the
Right.
real world.
Totally. And this is why, I mean, we launched New City when I was 26, and I wouldn't recommend it for most people. Not that we were like looking back on it, we would have done the same thing. But I see why waiting a little bit longer is helpful, because this is one of those things. Like for me, trying to learn how to preach while we're launching is not the most ideal situation.
Right, for sure.
No, it worked out, so thank you, Jesus, for that. But, having opportunities to preach, like if you've never preached before and you're like, I'm going to plant a church, like it's just, maybe you have all the qualifications and you've got a lot of wisdom, all that sort of thing. I would find, I got to find somewhere where I could like work this thing out, because it takes a while to find your voice. I mean, just being totally transparent, I've preached before. We're 2 years in. I still am trying to figure out who I am as a preacher.
Oh, I'm sure.
I'm closer, obviously, than to you, but I'm still like, I'm not sure if I like this, whatever. And so it takes a long time. Make sure you're working on it, but don't give up when you've been working on something and 6 months later or a year, it's like, I still feel like I'm hardly improved at all in this area. So that's number 3. And then number 4, we've talked about this before. Humor is important. So this is the last one. We'll end the episode with this one. Humor is so important. I will fight anybody to the death. I feel like it's less and less that people just say, well, just teach the Bible, because we're not a proponent of that here. We are a proponent of teaching the Bible. But if you teach it in a seminary style where you think everybody just wants to listen to you, I put it this way. And assume people don't care what you're saying. If you assume people don't care what you're saying, you'll work on being a better storyteller. You'll work on being more engaging, not to be cute or to manipulate, but to engage people, because we're in a culture where people don't care anymore. Yeah. And so for me, one of the best ways, and I've read a bunch of stuff on it, maybe we'll do an episode on it at some point, some of the ways that we can't be humor, or even some of the reasons why humor is important. People are more likely to believe you if there's laughter. They're more likely to listen to what you're going to say if there's laughter. They're more likely to like you if there's laughter, which means if we're trying to give them the most important true message of all time, should we not do everything we can to engage them while we're actually preaching?
Right. Yeah. I don't know that. I don't know how anyone can disagree with this one. Anytime you hear someone speak, one of the biggest things you remember is, hey, that person made me laugh. Right. Like if someone made you laugh, you remember it. And so this is one of those ones that I don't know how anyone can disagree with. Right. Because we universally agree laughter means you're happy. And if you're happy, you're listening. If you're happy, you're not upset with what they're saying. Right.
Yeah, and again, we'll do this future episode on this. Yeah. Nobody thinks they're funny, so we cannot use the excuse, I'm not funny. I've been reading some books on public speaking and humor and all sorts of things, and I was like, this is so true. Hardly anyone thinks they're funny, but people can use humor, and we can talk about what it looks like in another episode. I just want to say this: read books on it, talk to people about it, watch people that are funny, learn how to tell not how to tell jokes, but how to bring humor to situations. Because again, if people laugh, if their defenses are down, they will listen to what you say. Which is why, again, we've talked about this before. We strongly recommend starting your sermon right away with a sermon or with an illustration or a story. Do not say, hey, my name is so-and-so. I'm so happy to be here. If you're multi-site, hey to all of our campuses. Like, people do not care. You can introduce yourself if you really want to a few minutes in, but the first minute is the only time you have everybody's attention. Yeah. And if you can make people agree with you or laugh at something or find humor in something that you did or you experienced, they're much more likely to listen to you to the rest of the way. And so don't be afraid of humor. Again, don't be cliche and don't just don't be a comedian. Yeah. But most of us aren't good enough to be comedians anyway, so I don't think it's something you need to worry about. But use humor, use appropriate humor, because that will tear down the defenses. And if we want to engage people with the gospel, we're human beings and we respond to humor, and so we should use it if we can.
Yeah, I don't know of any speaking situation where you're going to come up against more defenses than preaching.
And here's what's funny, talking about, I don't know if I was going to share this, but we'll end it with this.
Perfect.
So I do feel like, personally, I have improved the last 2 years. Not that I'm amazing in any stretch, but better than I was 2 years ago. And I think anybody would say that about themselves. Give 2 years of anything. This past Sunday that we're recording this was Easter. I had someone come up to me and said, Dylan, I just want you to know that I feel like they've been with us since the beginning, I think. They said, you have improved a lot. Like, you're way better than you used to be. Yeah. What was funny is, and I mean, you were there on this past Easter. I had some good story, like some funny things to share. Like, I had normally if I can get like one or two good laughs, I'm like, I probably had 3 or 4. And they were not they were planned. Like, I knew they were going to happen. And so he comes and he says this to me, and I'm thinking, I do think I've gotten somewhat better. But the reason you're saying that is because you laughed a lot today. Yep. And then, again, it wasn't me trying to be a comedian. It's just the stories and illustrations I was using just happened to be funny, which you can do that intentionally or make funny things happen again. But anyway, he laughed a lot. And I think that he was engaged and he learned, because that was the goal. The goal is not to be funny. The goal is to engage. And when they use humor, people will listen.
It engages. Yeah, I think an easy way to do this, and we should do an episode on this. I think this is a good topic, is learn how to be a good storyteller.
Yep.
If you can tell a story well, then you can make people laugh. If you get up there and try and, if you're not someone who's naturally funny, if someone who's very rigid and you get up there and try and force it and try and tell jokes and things like that, it's going to make it a lot worse.
That is.
So yeah, learn how to tell stories, study people that tell stories well,
Yep.
and you'll be able to make some people laugh.
So again, we try to keep this below 15 minutes. We failed slightly, but thanks for listening today. Here are 4 things I've learned. Again, experience is the only thing that you need to get better. Nervousness does go away, or at least greatly reduces. Improvement is much slower than you would hope it would be, and humor is important. So thanks for being with us today. Just so you know, as we end our episode, if you go to our YouTube channel, type in Practical Church Planting, you will find one of our playlists is a free preaching course.
Yes.
We originally did this back in December. We were going to sell it, but we were like, nah, who got time for that? We're church planters. We talk more about this and things and topics like these on that course, and it is completely free. It's like 7 or 8 modules.
Yeah.
And so I would go there and watch it if you want to learn more,
it.
and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well so you can see our pretty faces more often.
What more could you want?
So thanks for being with us. If you have questions about preaching or anything about ministry, practicalplanting.com/questions. And until next time, we'll be with you on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.